Okay, welcome everyone. We're just getting started. I'm gonna wait for a few more people to join, but we can go ahead and start our introductions. Good morning and welcome everyone to our webinar Wednesday on grant writing under the Uniform Guidance. My name is Amy Miller and I am the Federal Grants Administrator at the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research, or OPR. We're going to start with a few housekeeping items. All materials from today's webinar will be shared on the OPR website under Federal Grant Resources. You'll receive a follow-up email with that link, as well as a survey, which we hope you'll fill out. You can write any questions that you have in the Questions tab, and they'll be answered at the end of the presentation. So before we get to our presentation today, I'd like to say a few brief words about OPR. We are the state's comprehensive planning agency, and one of our responsibilities is being the state's single point of contact for federal grants. You can access all the federal grant resources on our website by hovering on the Clearinghouses heading on the OPR homepage and selecting Federal Assistance. As the single point of contact, the State Clearinghouse at OPR receives notices of all federal grant applications that are subject to intergovernmental review. Applicants will select the Applying for Federal Grants link to enter their information and the grant application cover sheet, and then the notice of their application will be automatically sent to registered state, county, and local elected officials in their area for review. Anyone can also review the submitted applications at the Submissions tab here. We also have tons of information on the Federal Grant Resources page. This is where the information from today's webinar will be saved. Information on this page can help you learn about grants, how to apply for them, how to manage them, as well as direct links to the grants pages of each federal agency. And the last thing I'd like to share is our federal grants e-list, which hopefully most of you receive, but if not, you can sign up for it here. This is a weekly email with updates on new federal grant opportunities, workshops, and other information and events. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Karen Norris for our presentation. Karen is a nationally recognized expert in the federal grants community based in the Washington, D.C. area. She is a consultant with Kanoko Consulting and regularly presents at state and national conferences. As a subject matter expert, Karen has provided testimony to the Maryland General Assembly and the United States Senate Subcommittee on Federal Financial Management about federal grants. We're very happy to have her here to share her insights on grant writing. So thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Amy. Well, good morning, everyone. This is Karen Norris, and I'm your instructor today, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you to talk about grant writing under the Uniform Guidance. So before we begin the presentation, let's go through a couple of polls. So, what type of organization are you representing? If you could just go ahead and fill it out, that would be great. We've got some state, tribal, county, or local government, nonprofit organizations, awesome, higher education institutions, and other. So that's great. So who is attending today? We've discussed. Now, how long have you worked with grants? If you could please answer this next poll. Wow, 30% of you, 1 year or less, 2 to 5 years. There's 60% of the class, 6 to 9, and 10 or more years, which is where I fall. I've been in grants for a long time. So that's awesome. Great diversity in the class. Diversity of different types of non-federal entities and governmental entities, and also how long we've been in grants. One of the reasons I like to know how long we've been working in grants is the uniform guidance was became effective December 26, 2014. For all federal agencies and all non-federal entities. So if you've worked in grants before 2014, you will have experience with the old prior OMB circulars, and then we all had to readjust how we did things when the uniform guidance went live. If you've started working in grants after 2014, you don't have the same depth and breadth of experience, but you didn't have to unlearn any bad habits, and you've only known the uniform guidance. So I think that's great, and each of us brings our own skill sets to our grant teams and to the webinar. Okay, let's see if I can go ahead and advance the slide. Sometimes there's a little delay. Yay! So here we go. We're going to first raise awareness of what the federal priorities and selection criteria are. Those are an absolute must to be aware of and to look for in applications, because that's how your proposal is going to be scored. And then we want to recognize the difference between merit review and risk reviews. And the merit review is of the proposal and it's the scoring, but now there's a risk review under the uniform guidance, which did not exist under the prior circulars, that we all need to cope with as well. Third, we want to look at some pre-award strategies that impact post-award performance. So the better we manage at pre-award, the easier and the better we'll be able to manage post-award. And then lastly, I thought in addition to federal grant opportunities, it might be of interest to do some searching on private funding opportunities in California. And the last learning objective will be a whole list of private foundations and corporate giving that you can look for funding in addition to the federal grants. So a few words. We'll start with Ellen DeGeneres, but seriously, I think overall, in the scheme of things, winning an Emmy is not important. Let's get our priorities straight. I think we all know what's really important in life, winning an Oscar. So the point, though, is what are the priorities and what are our federal priorities? So grant writing under the uniform guidance depends upon priorities and selection criteria for scoring the proposals during a merit review. However, there's also a risk review. Proposals must also demonstrate the ability to perform and achieve results. So let's start with, well, what are the federal priorities and selection criteria, and how would I recognize them? How would I find them in a grant solicitation? So first of all grants originate from a program statute, also known as a public law or an authorization. So Congress sees a need in society and they'll pass legislation like let's reduce deaths on the highway by mandating seatbelt use, or let's reduce health disparities in the, across the nation. So they will pass a public law, the program statute, and as part of that public law, there will be a grant program that's created. So the statute creates the grant program, and just as important, Congress will appropriate funding for that grant program. So what good is the grant program if there are no funds behind it, so you can't do anything? So that's equally important. And then this statute is where the priorities are found in the and certainly where they come from for the grant. And the statute should be referenced in the solicitation guidelines. And also you can look up the statute itself to get the source language, which is sometimes nice to include a quote or some phrasing from the program statute in your grant proposal. Priorities are usually, at least federal priorities, are usually structured into three little groups: the absolute priorities, the competitive priorities, and the invitational priorities. So let's look at each one. The absolute priorities, just as its name indicates, must be addressed. You cannot win a grant if you don't address the absolute priorities. So this is the wording that comes from the program statute, and it will limit the competition to a defined need. And what's tricky about the absolute priorities is oftentimes they are simply stated in the solicitation guidelines, maybe one sentence. And it might be the priority of this program is to, or the purpose of this program must address. So you will see some warning language like that and go, oh, okay, this must be the priority. But it will be very simple, one sentence, easy to overlook. Now we come to competitive priorities, and they provide extra points for some selected targets. A grant proposal, and please forgive me when I'm a little lazy, I mean financial assistance agreements would be grants, cooperative agreements, maybe fixed amount awards, but it's just easier to say grant. So, but I really mean grants and cooperative agreements, all of them. So the most grants are scored on a 100-point scale. So when you start adding up all the selection criteria, 20 points for this, 30 points for this, 15 points for that, they will add up to 100 points. With competitive priorities, they're going to give you extra points. Maybe the grant will be scored on 105 points or 110 points, depending on the competitive priorities. Now, not all solicitations will include competitive priorities. Some do, most do not. But if they do, they will be for specific target areas of interest. Like this grant is dedicated to children or families living in poverty, or for veteran populations, or for rural populations. And if you happen to address one of the competitive priorities in addition to the absolute priority, in addition to now, not instead of, then you might be able to earn a few more points than someone who can't address the competitive priorities. So the importance of these priorities varies with each proposal, and you may or may not be able to address them. And if you can't address a competitive priority, that's okay. You can still apply as long as you're addressing the absolute priorities. Invitational priorities have no point value whatsoever, which is so surprising, because usually if they are included in a solicitation, and not all solicitations have invitational priorities, but if they do, they're going to go on and on and on and on about, well, we would also be interested in, or the agency invites applicants that also address. So that's kind of the warning language that you would come across when, this must be an invitational priority. They're optional. They have no point values, but what happens is that they become important if there are tied scores, or there are too many proposals that score high enough to be funded, and then the funding agency has to make some kind of decision well, which ones am I going to, which ones of the qualified applicants am I going to give the proposals to? And sometimes they'll rule things out by geographic region. They'll want to spread out the awards across the country. Sometimes they'll look at these invitational priorities, which might give somebody a bump up. Well, in addition to the absolute that they also address. So when you can, it's good to include some language for invitational priorities in your grant proposals, but don't overdo it. Don't spend too much time on it because they're not scored. They're only used in certain circumstances. So Vince Lombardi, who was a football coach, if winning isn't everything, why do they keep score? And of course, the selection criteria is the way to score with your proposal. So let's see what they are. The merit review criteria are described in the uniform guidance under section 200-204. Now that provision will define them and tell you how they're used, but they won't list the particular merit criteria. The merit criteria for each proposal will be listed in the solicitation guidelines. And that determines how the proposal will be scored. There'll be point values for each criteria. There are maybe half a dozen of criteria that are commonly used among different grant programs, but you can have some different criteria from one grant to another. The trick is to find them in the solicitation. And what they can be used for is to form an outline for the proposal narrative. The reviewers are going to be working from a review score sheet when they're reading your proposal. And the reviewer score sheet is just going to list each of the selection criteria and the point values. So beginning with the end in mind, which is one of Stephen Covey's highly, 7 habits of highly effective people. If you begin with the end in mind, like, well, what is the reviewer going to look at when they score me? Know that they're going to have a score sheet. It could be on paper, it could be a digital score sheet, but they're going to be working from a score sheet that's usually 1 page, and it lists the scoring criteria. So you want to make it as easy as possible for those reviewers who are reading your proposal to find the different merit criteria. So you would want to be sure to write your narrative in the same order as the criteria. Write it with bold, make a bold heading. Plan of operation, is generally one. Quality of key personnel is generally another one. So you would want to use those scoring criteria as the headers in your outline to write your narrative, so the reviewer can easily find the criteria and score it. So here are 7 common criteria that are used across federal agencies, across federal programs. Now, they're not the only criteria, and as I said, there can be some differences from one grant program to the next, but here's a really good place to start. So first of all, they want to know if you're meeting the purpose of the authorizing statute. The authorizing statute is going to define what's the absolute priority of the grant. So you want to make sure that you're saying, oh yes, this program is not only addressing our priorities, but they also address the national priorities as defined in the authorizing statute. Extent of need is a big one. What in the world, what is going on in your local jurisdiction compared to the national stats, and where are your needs and what data do you have to back up those needs? Plan of operation, quality of key personnel, your budget and cost effectiveness, evaluation plan, and adequacy of resources. Let's talk about each one. So again, you're meeting the purpose is, does the proposal address the absolute priority? Is language present from the authorizing statute? Always a good tip. Take some time to Google that program statute and pull a paragraph or a sentence and put it in quotes and attribute it to the program statute. It's impressive to do that. Is there a correlation between the applicant's purpose for submitting and the absolute priority? In other words, are you submitting a program that is aligned with the absolute priority, or do you just have a program that you want funded and you're searching for any possible grant to submit, no matter what that grant is for? You always want to make sure that you are in alignment with the absolute priority. Is there a focus on anticipated outcomes, performance, and results? Extent of need, what are your local needs? Do your local needs exceed or below national averages, depending on what needs you're describing? Do the needs reflect the absolute priorities? Is there documented data? Was there a needs assessment? Now, this is not a usually mentioned. The SWOT analysis is not always mentioned in solicitation, but it's a really good little template for presenting a need statement. And if the solicitation doesn't give you a lot of guidance about what to include in a need statement, this is a really good little formula to follow. And so the S stands for strengths. You don't want to paint such a dark picture and a dire picture of your circumstances that the awarding agency will think, oh golly, if we give them the money, they're so bad off, they will never be able to implement this program. So you want to make sure in a needs assessment you always include some of your strengths, and those strengths could be your ability to monitor and your ability to track progress so you can see if the program is working, your ability to provide stewardship of federal funds because you're experienced. So you always want to include some strengths. You have experience with this particular program, and you have prior knowledge of it. Now, what are the weaknesses? Here's where the needs come in. Well, we're lacking this and this and this, and there's a gap in services, and are exceeding current resources. All of that good language that you would put in a typical needs statement. And then you would want to include something positive. Well, these needs present opportunities, and we're presenting this program as a result to address the needs. And then threats, the T would be, well, what are the obstacles that might prevent you? Where are you going to start? What are your obstacles? Well, we have to get public buy-in, or we have to perform public outreach to get to the people who need the services. And this program will address every one of those obstacles. So it's just a great little template if you're not quite sure how to write a needs statement. Criteria 3 is plan of operation, and this is usually where you have your goals stated, and these are the objectives, and these are my anticipated outcomes. So we're going to have the activities to address each objective so we can achieve our anticipated outcomes. And these are the methods and the strategies that we're going to use, whether it's on-site or virtual, or you're updating your website information, or you're providing services to people in need. Whatever your methods and strategies are, this is the section that it would go in. More becoming of higher importance under the uniform guidance is a timeline for completion. Not only what are you going to do, but when are you going to do it? And by focusing on the timeline, that makes your plan seem more real. Are there literature citations to confirm your approach? Very important under the uniform guidance. Is the program built upon evidence? Have you done a search to see, you're not just making it up or shooting from the hip, you're designing a program based on proven successful strategies. So include some research citations or literature citations to bolster what you're doing and why. So this literature search, again, I wanted to spend an extra slide just for a few words because it's important and it gives you credibility as an applicant. You've done your homework. You have an idea what works based on conducting your research. And you've developed your ideas with this knowledge. Is your idea consistent with the advice of noted authorities? Have you incorporated best practices? And therefore, is the program that you're proposing and that you will implement with your anticipated success of delivering this program, can it be replicated elsewhere? That's always important for federal agencies to know. And again, do you use an evidence-based approach? And that's a phrase that you should be using. This program plan is based on evidence, and you would demonstrate that through your literature search. I like this phrase, quality of key personnel. Some grants just say key personnel. So you want to talk about who's responsible and what their qualifications and prior experience is, and you want to be sure to include how much time they're going to dedicate on the project. Are they 100% dedicated to the project, 50% of time? What else is splitting their attention? From the project, but talk about it in terms of quality and expertise. Don't just describe the people. Make sure you point out that this is a quality person who's going to be leading the project. And then some addenda, some attachments that are allowed in these grant proposals, they allow you to provide a resume or a CV of key personnel, the project director, the co-director, maybe a particular trainer. Don't overdo it. Limit it to 1 to 2 pages. Now, for those of you who work in institutions of higher ed, and I come from the field of education, I worked for K-12s and institutions of higher ed. I know my faculty members, and their resumes will be 20 pages long, including lists of publications that they've done. Don't put that in the proposal. Make them give you 1 to 2 pages because the reviewers won't read it. And some proposals will put a character or limit or a limit for how many megabytes a whole proposal file can include. So, you have to be judicious with what you include in the addenda. And if they are unable to whittle, I don't know how to whittle it down, it's all important. Oh my goodness. Well, I'll do it for you, not to worry. And we can still include your full resume at the time if we're awarded or if we're negotiating or if they ask for more information, but at least this will give us a start. And then if you don't know who you're going to use you don't have your project director or your principal investigator in mind, well, then use a position description to describe the type of person you would be hiring to fill that position. And then the important thing is what happens to the position after the project ends. Is the institution going to commit to continuing that position, or is that position going to be terminated once the grant is terminated? So it's always good to be upfront about that at the beginning. For your 5th criteria is budget, and numbers do more than just add up. They tell a story, and you want to make sure that your numbers reflect that it's a good investment. Will the funds make a difference? Um, do the costs in your budget match what you're saying you want to do in the narrative? Is there mandatory or required cost sharing? Which means you're going to have to find some non-federal resources, and you would want to be able to explain that. And then a big question is what's sustainable after the project ends. And I have some sustainability language for you to use later on in the presentation. Evaluation is important. What are you going to evaluate? Who's responsible? What methods are you going to poll? Are you going to have anecdotal data? You know, how are you going to ensure timely collection of the data? Did you bother to take a baseline data before you started implementing the grant so you can do a before and after picture? So are you using surveys, interviews, meeting records? And then some grants require that you hire a third-party evaluator. So make sure you address that if it's required. What assessment tools are going to be used? Is there existing instrumentation or does it need to be developed? Are you going to routinely measure data and really just collect it? Collect it and then analyze it. And then what will change once you've measured what you've done? And then can the change be sustained? Is there lasting change? Adequacy of resources is not always present, but if it does, you would talk about what existing resources are available. We have a building that we're going to deliver the grant in. We have internet connectivity. We have existing staff that will dedicate their time to the grant. You can volunteer these resources and you can describe them in the narrative, but do not put them on a budget sheet. If you're providing voluntary cost sharing, don't put a number value. Do not put it on the budget sheet. That is the more recent thinking. Describe it in a budget narrative, describe it in the proposal narrative, and then say, however, no value has been assigned to this extensive contribution. If you do not value it, it's not subject to audit, which is great because many non-federal entities will overstate the value of their contributions and then they get into trouble during an audit. Can existing resources contribute to sustainability? Let me give you an example, case history. Institution of Higher Ed submitted a grant. They had required cost sharing, and they're going to run the program in a building. And so they said, okay, let's offer up the building as our in-kind contribution, our cost sharing. So they got the real estate appraisal so they could document the value of the building. It was $1 million. It was a very, very noteworthy cost sharing contribution. So it went into the grant, they were awarded the grant, and now a year later they're up for an audit, and the auditor goes, wow, you really have quite remarkable cost sharing here. It's oh yeah, this building, and we have the paperwork to show we have the appraisal. We can demonstrate that this building really is worth $1 million. And the auditor said, I saw that, that's great. So tell me, are you using the whole building for the program? Oh, no, we're not using the whole building. Okay, no problem. Are you using half the building for the project? No, we're not using half the building for the project. Okay, tell me what you are using for the project. Well, we're using one room. We're using the computer lab for this project in the building. Oh, I see, one room. But are you using it every day? No, one day a week. So you understand their $1 million valuation of that building was way overstated. They got dinged with a big disallowance because they really didn't have enough cost sharing for that program because of that stated existing resources. If the cost sharing is mandatory, you can't get around it. You must value it. You must state the value. You must put it on the budget sheet. It is subject to audit. You must be careful what value you assign to mandatory cost sharing. If the cost sharing is voluntary, for Pete's sakes, just describe it. It's okay. You're just giving an indication that you have things available to support the project. Don't put it on the budget sheet. You do not want it subject to audit. And we'll have time for questions at the end if you have any questions about that. So here's an example of a reviewer score sheet. And you can see it's one page and there are, it's tiny little print. I'm sorry, but I wanted just to give you an idea. This was a real reviewer score sheet that I used when I was reviewing for the U.S. Department of Education. And you can see the criteria are listed there on the left. In the middle column, that's the number of points, and then on the right is what the score was supposed to be. And then at the bottom, they were simply to list what are some of the strengths and what are some of the weaknesses. So you want to make sure when you're writing your proposals that it's easy for your reviewers to find those headers of what the selection criteria are. Now, those were selection criteria for program grants, typically. Let's talk about research grants, because some non-federal entities apply for research grants, and the merit criteria is often a little different. They're going to focus on intellectual merit and broader impact. So what does that mean? So if you are, and you can use this language in any proposal that you're using, but for research proposals, they're important to include. So what is the intellectual merit? What's the potential to advance knowledge? You're going to create knowledge through this research that's being conducted. Is it just specific to one field, or would it impact many fields? And then activities could reflect the original or a revised concept. Maybe you had done some prior work in the subject area before, and based on that, you're revising based on what you found out you discovered previously. So that's some of the language that would be included in a research proposal. And for broader impacts, you would want to talk about the potential to benefit society and contribute to desired outcomes, finding a vaccine for COVID-19. That would be a potential benefit to society, right? And then demonstrating the broader impacts is going to require evaluation, so you would want to make sure that your evaluation plan is solid. Reviewers will look for metrics and benchmarks and impact, and they're going to compare that to what you're asking for. So is this a very expensive research, or is this a very cost-effective method of research compared to the potential benefit? So what else is included in a proposal now that we've gone through typical merit criteria? So there will be a cover sheet and other federal forms, a whole bunch of federal forms. And if you want to get an idea of some of the federal forms that are included in a typical federal proposal, you can go up to grants.gov, where you would be submitting the federal proposal. You can go up to grants.gov, and on the home screen, across the top of the page is a menu bar, and it's not dead center, but it's right of center. There's a tab called Forms, and you can click on the Forms tab and you can see the forms repository. Now, not all grant proposals will use all federal forms, but you can get an idea. And generally they use what's called the 424 family of forms. So there'll be a 424, a 424A, a 424B, a 424C, or some variation of that. There'll be an assurance form possibly, although they're starting to do federal assurances through sam.gov registrations rather than through proposals. There'll be forms about lobbying. If you are accepting federal funds, you have to certify that you will not use federal funds to lobby and try to influence a member of Congress. And then they may have a form for the narrative. But you'll have a whole bunch of forms. Then you'll have your written narrative, you'll have your budget and your budget narrative, and then there'll be some assorted appendices. So before you begin, you want to think about context, what's happening nationally compared to what's happening in your local area. What does the absolute priority say? What are the needs and what impact? What will change? If you win and you're given that award, what will be different once you're done compared to the way things were at the time you started? And is there any part of it that can be sustained afterwards? Share your thought with leaderships and make sure you gain approval to pursue your application before you start getting too deep into it. So writing begins with priorities and selection criteria. They'll be in the grant guidelines. Now that you know some of the vocabulary, you can better search for them. You want to absolutely find the absolute priority. You want to find the list of criteria that's going to be scored. And then you're going to base the narrative outline on the priorities and the selection criteria and make them bold headers so the reviewers can find them easily. So it's time for a poll. And Amy is going to take control and insert the poll. Please respond to the poll. It doesn't matter if you have a right or wrong answer. What matters is that you're clicking. You're clicking, and so we know you're here and attending to the webinar. So please select one of the following. How should the proposal narrative be written? Oh, look at you guys. Aren't you amazing? According to the selection criteria, gold star for this class of attendees. Great. Okay, come on, slide. I'm trying to, there we go. So now we've talked about selection criteria. Let's get on to objective number 2. And let's talk about, well, what's the difference between the merit review and the risk review? And so I love this one, Mark Twain. Denial ain't just a river in Egypt. So please pardon my corny humor. But anyway, you don't want to be denied. You want to win. And you're going to win 2 ways. Number 1, there's going to be a merit review. And number 2, there's going to be a risk review. Now, for those of us who've been in the grant business for many years, we used to stop with a merit review. There was only a merit review under the old circulars, and the proposals would pretty much win based on the score of the merit review, the score of the proposal. Now, in addition to the merit review, there's going to be a risk review, and the two put together will determine which applicants receive funding. So let's talk about the difference. So the merit review is going to be all about the proposal. It's the selection and criteria that we've been talking about, the scoring rubric. The higher scores generally get the funding and the lower scores generally do not get the funding. Proposals can be denied based on merit. Maybe you've just, the applicant has written a proposal and it was just weak. So if you're denied on merit, that's okay. It's like, well, it's very disappointing. We were counting on that proposal, but nothing punitive or bad is going to happen other than the fact that you just didn't win the proposal, and you can try to improve it based on your reviewer scores and submit again the next cycle. On the other hand, once the proposal review is done, the granting agency is going to turn to a risk review, which is all about the applicant. The risk review is not about the proposal, it's about the applicant. So what's the applicant's organization's past performance? Do they have prior experience implementing federal grants? And if they have gotten awards in the past, how did they do? Did they do a good job, or are they high risk? Did they have a lot of audit findings that they never corrected? So past performance is a biggie. Weaknesses in the financial system. Can your financial system keep track of the federal award money and keep it separated from your general funds? Are there any past disputes, audit findings, any recovery of funds that need to be reconciled before a new award can be given? So applicants are generally categorized as either low risk, moderate risk, or high risk. And of course, it's better to be low risk or moderate risk. High risk, if you're a high risk grantee, then the funding agency has to think. They have to make a determination. Well, am I going to throw more money after bad to a high risk applicant who's going to have trouble providing stewardship of funds? So applicants can be denied based on risk. Well, okay, the proposal was pretty good. I don't have issues with the proposal, but this applicant has had problems, a very bad past history of grants. I don't think we should make an award based on risk. And if an applicant is denied on risk, then that's punitive. They end up being entered into the FAPIS system, the Federal Awardee Performance Integrity Information System. It's a database. It's a federal database that is a database of bad contractors and bad applicants. And federal agencies, when they're reviewing risk, they're going to check that database to see if an applicant is in that database. And then they have to have a pretty good reason. Well, gee, they're in the database, this bad database. You've got to be able to have a pretty good rationale if we're going to give them an award. So why? Well, the lower the risk, the philosophy is, the lower the risk, the less likely there'll be waste, fraud, and abuse. And the higher the risk, the more likely there are going to be problems with the grant. There are going to be problems with waste, fraud, and abuse, and just unintentional errors. So here, as I said, if a proposal is based on merit, is denied based on merit, it's disappointing. But the denial is limited only to the loss of the proposal only. There's no adverse impact to other future applications. There's no adverse impact to the applicant. But on the other hand, if an applicant is denied based on risk, that's a big deal. The denial can extend to all federal funds. The determination is posted in that FAPIS database and it stays there for 5 years. The applicant is basically considered not eligible for federal funds. So there is a potential adverse impact to the applicant over time. So why is this so serious? Why is risk so serious? So let's look at the money. Annually, there is $700 billion given out to federal grants and cooperative agreements every year. It's remarkable. The grant community has surpassed the federal contract community. All those defense contracts we always hear about. $500 billion for contracts, $700 billion for grant awards. You put two together, $1.2 trillion is given out. Federal funding is given out to non-federal entities to provide stewardship over the funds. So let's just concentrate on that $700 billion figure. Of this, here's the flip side of the coin. Of that $700 billion, look at this unfortunate, unhappy list. look at all the improper payments. And last year, of the 700 billion that was given out, 175 billion was improperly paid. And that comes from a government accountability report. And there's the report number at the bottom of the chart in case you want to look it up. Well, Karen, what do you mean by an improper payment? Well, an improper payment can be anything from an innocent, unintentional error. Oh, I needed to keep my receipt. Really? I don't have it. You mean I can't get paid if I don't have the receipt? Can't you pay me? Really? You can see we're using the equipment. It's right there. I just don't have the receipt. So an unintentional improper payment all the way across the full spectrum of waste, fraud, and abuse. It is remarkable the amount of money that's improperly paid. So there are steps to address pre-award risk, and the awarding agencies are going to be checking out the applicant and their past performance and everything we've talked about. They're also going to look at these do not pay lists, the excluded parties list service. There's a suspension and debarment list. There's this FAPIS database, and they're going to check all of that to decide whether or not they're going to award the applicant. And they also, and as we talked about before, they're going to look at the financial management system, the quality of their management systems, history of performance. Are they late with the reports? Are they on time? Everybody gets audit findings, but do they correct them, and do they don't get them every year, the same audit findings year after year? They're not correcting the source of the problem if that happens. And then what's the applicant's overall ability to implement the award if we give it to them? Other ways to address risk would be good internal controls, whether the applicant has written local policies and procedures that explain how they keep timesheets, how they monitor themselves, how they conduct their own risk assessments, local policies and procedures. Is there a clear organizational structure? Is there a table of organization? Does the applicant have record retention capabilities, and do they have a record retention policy? Can they demonstrate successful past experience managing awards? And are they able to comply with applicable laws and regulations? Yes, I've read the uniform guidance. I have a copy of it right here. I'm familiar with the federal agency regulation, and I'm familiar with the program statute. I'm also familiar with my local laws. Applicants should assess their partners. If you're going to have a partner with a grant, you have to do the same thing. You have to conduct a risk assessment. Is your partner going to benefit you, or is your partner going to add a liability? Do they have good prior performance? Do they have good financial systems? Do they have a history of successful performance and results? By the way, are they in FAPIS or on any of the other watch lists? So you have to assess your partners too. Okay, very good. Let's move on to learning objective number 3, which is about, well, what are some of these pre-award strategies that can help us with post-award? Because each application serves as an ambassador to the implementation of the project. So Yogi Berra, the future ain't what it used to be. So yeah, you don't want to have overstated goals in your proposals. You don't want to have, risk, or you just don't want to have things that are included in your proposal that are going to interfere with your ability to implement if you're awarded. So let's start with this concept of sustainability, which is of interest to all awarding agencies, whether you're dealing with a federal awarding agency, a pass-through awarding agency, or a private funder. What will make a difference? If I give this funding to you, is there going to be any kind of lasting change? Or as soon as the grant is over, is all the good that's happening under the grant, is it all going to disappear? What can last? What will be the impact? Can you say you have long-term outcomes? Is there any capacity building going on? Can it be replicated, or what some federal agencies refer to as scale up? And are you using best practices? So here's the sustainability language that I've created that I am giving you. Please feel free to use any part of this, because this is one of the hardest things to describe in a proposal, is some sense of sustainability. You cannot commit your organizations or institutions to any costs after the grant is over. So therefore, how would you then be able to describe anything that could be sustainable? So here's some examples, and you don't have to use this exactly as written, but hopefully these ideas will get you thinking about how you can modify this for your own particular organization and setting. So while all the objectives of the project strive to build capacity, right? We always strive to build capacity and sustainability. It is important to develop with purpose and initiative that will be sustained over time. That's a pretty good sentence. So use it. Several factors contribute to the sustainability of the program. So here's where you demonstrate it's not just empty lip service. You really have some thought behind it. And so what are some of these factors? And you also finally want to say the level of support may not replace 100% of the award amount or the grant or contribution, but there are some parts of it that can be sustained. For example, the relationships forged among the applicant, institutions of higher ed, if they were your partners, the business community, the county government, any military partners. So anybody you've worked with in delivering this grant, those relationships can continue once the grant is over. 2, the business community networks that were created. 3, the project infrastructure, including existing staff, leadership, and existing resources. Whatever you had before is going to be there after the grant is over. The knowledge gained through the extensive outreach efforts, or let's say you've created a curriculum as part of this grant, or you've created an outreach brochure. Whatever you've created, you can use subsequently beyond termination of the grant period. The development and refinement of services and offerings, or if it was a professional development grant, it could be, well, now that staff is trained, they can reuse their knowledge and skills beyond termination of the grant. They can train you can have a train the trainer model where the trained staff under the grant can train other personnel that comes behind them. So hopefully this little slide here is worth your taking this class in addition to the other information, and hopefully there is some information that you can glean from this slide to help you describe some sustainability without committing your organization to money after the grant is over. That's the trick. With need, you want to make sure that there's a documented gap in the programs or services that can reflect improvement. And then would you identify a control group that you're going to monitor compared to a group receiving services under the grant? You say, look, the people receiving services are doing much better than the people who didn't receive services. So depending upon how you set up your need and you set up this up in pre-award, would you or wouldn't you be using a control group post-award? Does anyone else have the same need? What is the potential for replication? What have others done to address the need? And again, where are your literature citations? Your management plan and monitoring, the clearer your plan of operation is, your timeline, what are you going to do and when are you going to do it and who's in charge of doing it? You know, who has the authority to make the decisions and who has the responsibility to carry out the project, and how will errors be discovered and corrected? How will progress be reported and documented, and are you reporting on time? How will risk be detected and remediated? Do you have a good management plan? Do you have a monthly time schedule? Month one, set up the project. Month two, implement, you know, first phase one, you know, have a little 12-month timeline that's included in your proposal, a management plan, and then you can monitor each month. You can report, well, yes, we successfully completed this, or oops, we've got to carry this over to the next month. But you're monitoring and you're correcting. So applicants who have elevated risk can receive an award. So a granting agency can award a high-risk grantee. So if you're an organization that's new and it's never had a federal grant before, you're going to come in at a slightly higher risk because you have no past performance to prove that you can manage grant awards. But even if you have had problems in the past and you are considered high risk, you can still receive a grant. And what the federal awarding agency would do is they would include specific conditions in the award agreement. And 200-207 is the provision in the uniform guidance that lists what those specific conditions are and how they can be used. For example, everybody reports quarterly. You need to report monthly. We have to keep closer monitoring on your performance. Everyone else could have advance payment. You're high risk. You're going to be cost reimbursement only. So there are some adjustments that a federal agency can award, that can arrange in order to get you that award, even if you have high risk. The specific condition, whatever caused the issue, should be corrected during post-award. And once that problem area is corrected, like you've had an outstanding audit finding, well, fix it and show that you fixed it. And once the issue has been corrected, the awarding agency can award the award document, can amend the award document and remove the restriction. And now you're no longer a high risk grantee. Maybe you're moderate risk, a good thing. So here on this slide are some more examples of specific conditions. No advance payments. They can hold funds until that report is submitted. They might require additional reporting, additional monitoring, additional prior approvals. Yeah, they can freeze your funds until you've submitted that late report, that missing report, or you corrected that audit finding, or whatever is the issue is. Time for another poll. Can awards be made to applicants with high risk? And Amy is going to put the poll up. Here we go. Doesn't matter if you know the answer, just click. Click on through. Look at you guys, 100%. Yes, with specific conditions. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to try to click again. Here we go. So here's something else that you can think about when you're writing. You're going to be looking for the priorities, the absolute priorities, and you're going to be looking for the selection criteria, and you're going to want to be sure that when you're writing your proposal, you're going to address them. But something else that you can look for is something called the GPRA goals, or the GPRA goals. So GPRA is the Government Performance Results Act, and it was amended and approved in 2010. And this act, Congress describes the goals that every federal agency must address, assigned by Congress. So the Department of Health and Human Services will have goals. The Department of Labor will have goals, and these goals are often found on a federal agency's website listed as GPRA or GPRA goals or Government Performance Results Act goals. Sometimes they're listed on a federal agency website as its strategic plan. But if you take the time to do a little research on the federal agency website, and you can identify their strategies or their goals and missions, and you can say, hey, not only are we addressing a public need when we're implementing this grant, but we're also addressing the federal agency's GPRA goals. Big gold star. So does the awarded program also address the agency's strategic plan or Government Performance Results Modernization Act goals? So there's a tip to look that up for each federal agency that you receive funding from. So applicants become recipients. They can research the federal agency mission statement and strategic plan, which reflects the GPRA goals. This information provides insights into advancements, priorities, societal benefits that are of most interest to the awarding agency. And then if you're also demonstrating you have the same interest and your project is also working toward those goals, that is a big reason for that federal agency to award you. And then what is the potential impact of the project toward those goals? Proposal goals and deliverables. In the award document, which is defined in the Uniform Guidance under provision number 200.210, the goals and objectives in the proposal become deliverables in anticipated outcomes in the award agreement. And the award agreements now must include deliverables or anticipated outcomes or anticipated results. And you would want to make sure that whatever objectives you promise in your proposal, you're going to be able to deliver on that promise. You don't want to have a promise that's too insignificant. On the other hand, you don't want a promise that is so formidable that there's no way you're going to be able to manage it within the project period. And now you've failed. You've failed. You haven't performed. So that the wording of your goals and objectives are really important, and they lead to what's called outputs and outcomes. So let's talk about this. An output is something that's produced. Maybe it's a total number of workshops that you've given, total number of attendees. It's numbers. Outputs are generally numbers. Outcomes reflect what has changed. Okay, the 30 attendees participated in the workshop. Okay, or 150 attendees participated in 5 workshops, 30 attendees each. What's the impact of that? So a lot of non-federal entities stop with the output, stop with the numbers. But if you're able to show what the impact is, then that's all the better. What's the impact over time? What was the benefit of those attendees taking that workshop? Well, they got a certification. They're now able to deliver a curriculum that they couldn't have delivered before. They now know what better strategies to help the public with social distancing techniques because of COVID-19. Whatever change or benefit or impact you can reflect, there's your outcome rather than your output. So here's an example. We will hold a conference offering a session on grant writing for 50 math instructors. That's good. Okay, we know what you're doing. That's a pretty decent objective. However, you're assuming that learning takes place. You're assuming that there's going to be something different with those math instructors after they take that session, as opposed to the second objective. 75% of math instructors should be attending the grant writing session will demonstrate a minimum of 50% increase in knowledge about strategies for writing a competitive grant proposal based on pre and post session surveys. So now you're documenting that there's been a change. So the more you can write outcome objectives rather than output or process objectives, the better. And a logic model is a wonderful tool, an evaluation tool that defines the difference between outputs and outcomes. And the very next webinar Wednesday that the Governor's Office of Planning is offering to everyone will be a webinar based on the logic model, using logic models, which is a perfect segue from this one. So again, a reminder, outputs versus outcome. Raise some awareness of the difference, some self-awareness. Which objective is more worthy of funding? Which objective would be easier to measure or to demonstrate progress so you can report on your results? So the key to outcomes would be measurable objectives, and there's a lot of granting agencies are using something called SMART objectives, and it's a little template that, and it's pretty much the way that second objective was written. It was specific, it was measurable, it was achievable, and it was realistic, and it was time dependent within the period of time. Again, what will be different as a result, and can the change be long lasting? Great, we're doing great, and we're doing great with our timing. We're on the fourth learning objective, and what I've done is I went ahead and did a search for you. I know that you can go up to grants.gov and look for federal opportunities on grants.gov. But these federal grant proposals are very formidable to put together. And what if you're just starting out, or what if you're looking for a non-federal proposal, maybe to use as match? There's a federal proposal, the federal proposal you're going for, the federal proposal requires mandatory match, and you've got to come up with some resources, some source for the match, and maybe a non-federal proposal might do the trick. So what are some of these proposals? So when you're searching for grants and you're searching with the public agencies, you're going to look at grants.gov, or you can go to federal agency websites, or you can go to state agency websites. You can go to city and county websites. None of the state proposals, opportunities, or the county and city opportunities are going to be listed on grants.gov. Grants.gov only lists federal opportunities. So that's the place to go. But if you're looking for something that's more local, you won't find it on grants.gov. Private funders do not have the same organizational structure that federal agencies have. Grants.gov and each of the federal agencies and each of the state agencies, they have their own websites. And on their websites, they list the grants that are available. Private funders, the grants.gov will list opportunities from the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Labor or Commerce. They list government-wide all the opportunities. Otherwise, you would have to search on each individual funding agency's proposal. So that's kind of how it is with the private foundations, unless you've purchased a subscription to, the foundation offers some paid subscriptions. As soon though as you buy something that is in a database or that is on a CD or DVD, it's anything new that comes along is hard to update. So if you do decide to go with something paid, you want to ask the question, is this a subscription, and do you update this subscription as new announcements are made? And how frequently do you update? Is it a once a year thing? Do you update quarterly? Do you update weekly? Otherwise, you can go directly to private funders' websites. So on the next few pages, I've listed a whole bunch of foundations that are in California. And private foundations are more geographically dependent than the federal applications. The private funders are going to be more interested in applicants from their own backyard. Now, there are some national private funders like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation. There are national foundations that will would be interested in receiving proposals and would make awards to applicants from all over the country. But a lot of proposers are really interested within their geographic region. So here's a bunch of them. So you've got Silicon Valley Community Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, David and Lucille Packard. All of these are really famous foundations. They happen to be in California. The Tides Foundation, the California Community Foundation, San Francisco Foundation, Eli and Edith Broad Foundation, the Asia Foundation, Conrad Hilton, Hilton Hotels in California, James Irvine Foundation, Annenberg, Big Television Media in California. They will award nationally, but they're in California. They would like to see some California applicants. The Energy Foundation, the Orange County Community Foundation. There's a Jewish Community Foundation of Los Angeles, and you could probably find other faith communities as well. The William K. Bowes Jr. Foundation, the Trust for Public Land, Sierra Club has an office in California. William and Keck Foundation, that is a wonderful foundation for science. And we were able to apply to Keck Foundation when I worked for my institution of higher ed in Maryland for our planetarium. If you're at university, they really like science. Entertainment Industry Foundation, how California is that? Marin Community Foundation, the Jim Joseph Foundation. Safeway is in California. San Diego Foundation, Roberts Foundation, Dave Geffen Foundation, Music and Arts, Weingart Foundation, Blue Shield of California. That's great because Blue Shield is in every state and they offer health grants and public service grants. The Skull Foundation. Now, I have not vetted each of those foundations. That would be up to you. But at least you have a starting point, a wonderful list. Google the foundation, check out the website, and see if they have the same funding interests as the particular need that you're trying to fund. Now, with foundations, they are more relaxed with selection criteria. Some of these foundations will say, well, just submit a letter of intent and we'll get back to you. If they don't give you a lot of instruction about what to include in your letter or in your proposal, don't hesitate to use the federal selection criteria. They're good and they work, and they will help you form a very compelling narrative for your foundation. So, in summary, as Benjamin Franklin once said, your net worth to the world is usually determined by what remains after your bad habits are subtracted from your good ones. So, you would hope that what's left with your proposal, the good outweighs the weaknesses, and you'll be funded. And in summary, for federal grants, the uniform guidance focuses on program and financial performance in addition to compliance. Priority is to reduce improper payments. $175 billion of improper payments last year is pretty compelling. No wonder they're focused on risk and the reduction of improper payments, waste, fraud, and abuse. So you would want your narrative language to include part of that, a part of that thought, and the fact that you're aware of it, and you pledge to provide good stewardship of the funds if you're awarded. And then award decisions are based on merit reviews of the proposal as well as risk reviews of the applicant. Recipient performance on one grant will impact all future grants. Pre-award promises are increasingly connected to post-award performance. So be mindful how you write your objectives and what you claim you're going to complete if you're awarded. Make sure you can deliver on those promises. Pre-award staff must coordinate with post-award staff now more than ever. Today's proposals must include language about the merit criteria and scoring, applicant risk factors, and the ability to provide good stewardship of federal funds. Feel free to use that phrase. And we're now at the question and answer session.
Okay, so let's see here. We did get a number of questions in. Thanks everyone for sticking around. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so we had a few questions about the availability of the webinar, and we will be sending out an email tomorrow with a link to where all the information will be stored on the OPR website. If you caught the introduction, it's going to be there where it says Federal Grant Resources. We'll be posting that. It may not be available tomorrow because we still have to get some ADA accessibility for those documents, but it should be up in the next few days. Okay, and so one question here was what type of, going back to the sustainability parts, what type of sustainability narrative do funders want to see? So anything else you want to add about that, Karen?
Not really. That's a good, I mean, I've given you some general language for that. You have to speak to your leadership in your organization to help answer that question. For example, in your proposal, if you're going to create a position you win the grant, what's going to happen to that position when the grant is over? Is the position going to go away, or is the organization or institution willing to keep that position and pay for it even after the funding disappears? So that's a typical question. And so other than the general language that I've given you, anything specific to your proposal would have to be addressed with your own institution.
Great, thanks. Another question here. How can newbie applicants to major federal grants be perceived as low or medium risk if they have no to little experience and not much in resources?
You would talk about your system of internal controls, and there are 5 components of a system of internal control. Amy, am I able to type something in chat?
You might be able to. Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Okay, there's 5 components of a system of internal control that's recognized by federal agencies, and it's control environment, who's in charge, who's signing off on things is one. Control activities, that would be your policies and procedures. Risk assessments, these might not be in particular order. How do you monitor for risk? How do you correct problems when you find them yourself? Monitoring, how do you monitor yourself?
Okay, great. So everyone can look into the chat box to see those responses.
Yeah, I haven't pressed the,
Okay.
I'm still typing, sorry. And then communication. There we have it. So there's
Great.
the chat box, and here are the 5. Now you can Google internal control, and you'll find the Green Book, which is on the GAO's, the Government Accountability's website, and you'll find what's called a COSO model. And that can give you some language. So if you're a newbie, you can, well, we have written policies and procedures. We have a good table of organization, a good chain of command. We have the right people who authorize. You know, we have to get signatures. We do a good job communicating with each other. And then once you've been awarded, even if you come in at moderate risk because you're new, you can say we anticipate successful completion as demonstrated by our required progress reports, and we anticipate having a low risk rating as demonstrated by our successful progress reports, which we will submit on time. So that's the kind of language, if you're a newbie, that you can include. We have a good management system. We have a good financial system. We can keep track of federal funds.
That's great. And hopefully everyone on the audience side can see the chat box. It should be on your window, the bottom tab there that you can open. Somebody had a question with that. So I'm not sure if we'll get to all the questions here, but here another one, couple questions about the FAPIS. Is FAPIS a public reviewable database, and what websites can be used to assess?
It used to be a standalone website at www.fapis.gov. It's now merged with www.sam.gov, which is a system for award management. And it's public, anybody can see it, which is why it's so damaging to non-federal entities who are in there. Because it kills their reputation.
Okay, and I think we'll do maybe 1 or 2 more questions here. One says, our organization is based in California, but our reach is global and national. What is the best way to reach out to private foundations?
you have a choice. You can go either way. You can look for the California app, or you can do the national or global, but you need to read their priorities. If they are a California um, foundation that is only interested in work being conducted in California, you would have to propose something that would only be for California. If you're proposing a program that's national or global, you would have to read the priorities of the funder that you found and where their area of interest is. Any
Okay,
other
great.
questions?
Yeah, let's see, one more, and I'm typing in the, because I think you'd send it unfortunately to the organizers only for your chat. So I'm just putting this all in again.
Oh,
No problem. So everyone should be able to see that information now in the chat. Okay, and I think we'll do one final question here. I think another question about foundations is what, let's see here. Okay, so sorry, there was trying to find the question. It was something about if you reach out to a foundation and they say that they don't accept unsolicited proposals, how can you approach foundations that say that they don't post open solicitations?
you can't. It's as
Hmm.
simple as that. Their board of directors has some favorites that they like. Could be a family foundation, could be, but you could ask them if they could make a recommendation. Would they look at a brief letter of intent of what you would like to do, and within their network of funders, could they recommend somebody for you to apply to? That would be a good way to do it.
Okay.
For your national, there is the RO. How do I change it? Organizers and presenter only. Governor's office.
So
I
there
don't
should be an
see
option to
that.
say that send a chat to all entire audience.
I don't see that. I'm sorry. So I won't do chat then. I'll just tell you that there is something called the Regional Association of Grant Makers, the RAGs, and they are an association of funding agencies, private funding agencies. They're national, and you can click on a state or you can look at national, and they really don't work with applicants. They only work with other funders. But you can look to see who's a member, and that will let you know who the regional or the national funding area grant makers are, and then you can look up their websites and contact them.
Okay, great. Thanks, Karen. So I think that'll do it for our Q&A section. So let me just continue on here. We'll just wrap up the rest of the presentation here.
Thanks, Amy. And if you all have questions that you think of afterwards, just email Amy or email me, and we'll be sure to get those questions answered and posted on the website. So just a friendly disclaimer, please be reminded that this presentation is really intended to provide general information. It does not constitute a legal or financial advice. Please consult with your legal and financial advisors. However, and I truly hope that the information that we've provided to you today helps provide some insights as you further pursue your work in the grants community. And a reminder that this was prepared for you by your wonderful Governor's Office of Planning and Research in the state of California. Not all governor's offices do this. You're so lucky to have such a great office in your state. And here's my contact information. There's my website and my email and phone number. So if you think of a question, you can email me, and I will respond, and I'll copy Amy, and she'll get the answer posted so that everybody has access to the same question.
Great, thank you, Karen. And so again, everyone who attended today will be receiving an email tomorrow with a link to where the information from this webinar will be posted on the OPR website. And we will also be sending out with that a survey that I hope everyone can fill out. It'll also include any ideas that you'd like to share for future topics for webinars, which would really like to hear from you about what you'd like to see for further assistance in the next few months, what types of trainings that you'd really appreciate. So I think that'll do it for us. Again, thank you so much for attending today and participating. We really appreciate it and hope to see you at our next event in June.
Great.
Thanks
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone. Been a pleasure.